In the darkest chapters of Colombia's recent history, few names evoke as much impact and mystery as that of Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. This man, who began his journey in the world of drug trafficking as a petty criminal, ended up becoming a legendary figure. Though shrouded in darkness, his legend is stained with blood betrayals and an insatiable thirst for power. Known as El Patron and regarded by many as the most feared, yet simultaneously idolized drug lord in the world, Escobar built a cocaine empire that not only spanned continents, but also profoundly transformed Colombia's history and left a permanent mark on global politics. However, behind the image he projected as a benefactor of the poor, there lay a far darker reality. His life, even decades after his death, continues to provoke astonishment and curiosity. The announcement of his death shocked the entire nation. The circumstances surrounding how he lost his life remains shrouded in uncertainty. Over time, multiple theories have emerged attempting to explain his end. Some depict him as a victim of his own environment. Others claim he accepted his fate, and a few lesser-known versions suggest he took his own life. What is certain is that the mystery surrounding his death has never been fully resolved. While official versions insist on one narrative, other voices offer completely different accounts. In 1991, after years of being pursued, Escobar finally surrendered to the Colombian authorities. However, his incarceration was far from conventional, thanks to a controversial deal with the government. He was locked up in a place known as La Catedral, a prison built by him on one of his private estates. At first glance, it seemed that the country had finally managed to put its most powerful criminal behind bars. But what followed was an unprecedented judicial farce. The so-called prison was far from a place of punishment. It was more like a luxury mansion designed to cater to every whim of the kingpin. The complex didn't just suit his lifestyle. It was entirely disconnected from the notion of punishment. It resembled a high-end vacation resort nestled in the mountains, offering breathtaking views. In this privileged environment, Escobar lived like a monarch, showing that even in confinement his power in Colombia remained intact. Inside La Catedral, he enjoyed luxuries unimaginable for any ordinary inmate. There were soccer fields where his men played, as if they were in a sports club, sprawling gardens with walking paths, and even artificial waterfalls that adorned the landscape. In his free time, Escobar enjoyed the tranquility of nature while plotting the next steps of his criminal operations. He also had his own security team, ensuring full control over the place. Meanwhile, the Colombian government tried in vain to maintain a facade of authority. But it was clear who truly ruled there: Escobar. External forces lacked the means to intervene or stop the drug lord activities. From within the prison, Escobar continued running his cocaine empire as if nothing had changed. He held meetings with his closest allies, organizing illegal operations with complete impunity. The prison became his command center, a base from which he continued managing his vast criminal network. His stay in La Catedral was a blatant mockery of the penitentiary system. Despite being charged with countless crimes and responsible for innumerable deaths in Colombia, he enjoyed privileged conditions that allowed him to continue committing crimes without major obstacles. It was as if the state itself was shackled before his influence, which extended far beyond the prison walls. Reports and rumors about the privileges Escobar received inside La Catedral quickly spread across the country. The supposed justice he was meant to serve became nothing more than a facade, powerless to contain his authority. He surrounded himself not only with luxury, but also with trusted individuals, family members, friends, and collaborators. This inner circle not only kept him company, but also carried out his orders. Within those walls, meetings were held to outline future plans of the cartel, organize logistics for drug shipments, and strengthen criminal alliances. All of this took place while the rest of the country lived in constant fear of the violence generated by his organization. Even from prison, Escobar maintained absolute control over his kingdom and lived a completely different reality. One of the most shocking aspects of La Catedral was that, instead of being cut off from the outside world, Escobar remained in constant communication. He had access to phone lines, and the facility became a key hub from which deals, conversations, and strategic decisions were managed. Although officially incarcerated, Escobar continued to lead his cocaine trafficking network from his personal fortress. Technically imprisoned, his grip on power was still absolute. As time passed, those trying to dismantle his organization grew increasingly frustrated and powerless. That the government had allowed him to live in such conditions revealed the extent of corruption and inefficiency in the system. Meanwhile, Colombia's streets became a stage for relentless violence, and Escobar remained in command from his palace-turned-prison. La Catedral was not just a symbol of Escobar's dominance over the country, but also a reflection of the state's inability to stop him. Within its walls, Escobar remained the supreme authority, the man who set the rules. That place of supposed confinement functioned, in practice, as an extension of his criminal empire. And although authorities claimed he was under surveillance, reality told a different story. The kingpin continued to make crucial decisions and orchestrate operations from his luxurious cell. Every corner of La Catedral bore his personal mark. Even as the authorities tried to contain his influence, Escobar always seemed to have the upper hand. The situation reached a breaking point when he himself began feeling uneasy in confinement. Despite the comfort of his gilded cell, the true threat to his peace was the possibility of being extradited to the United States, something he knew would spell the end of his reign. The relationship between Escobar and the Colombian state began to deteriorate. What initially seemed like a mutually beneficial arrangement quickly turned into a scenario of tension, suspicion, and betrayal. Ever calculating, the drug lord was willing to do whatever was necessary to secure his freedom, even if it meant confronting the government again and defying the laws he once so easily manipulated. Their relationship reached its most critical point in 1992. Despite appearances, he had never lost control of his organization. His cunning remained evident, even within the walls of La Catedral. When things began spiraling out of control, he realized that what had once been an advantage now offered neither the security nor freedom he desired. Mounting pressure from the state and the constant fear of extradition drove him to make the most daring decision of his life. In the early hours of July 22, 1992, a decisive turning point occurred in the history of global organized crime. In a meticulously planned maneuver, Escobar escaped La Catedral, accompanied by several of his most trusted men. Taking advantage of the thick morning fog, they managed to slip past guards and security measures which, though strict, weren't enough to prevent his escape from that luxurious confinement. The speed of the escape stunned his captors. No one could comprehend how, under such watchful eyes, Escobar had managed to evade prison so effectively. His getaway was not only a massive blow to Colombian authorities, but also a clear act of defiance against the legal system. As usual, he played by his own rules, and this time was no exception. While the state scrambled to find him, Escobar had already vanished into the mountains and dense vegetation surrounding the prison. His trail disappeared into the wilderness, leaving law enforcement baffled. A reward was quickly announced. 2.7 billion pesos for information leading to Escobar, and 100 million for each of the other fugitives. Jairo Velasquez, Luis Carlos Aguilar, Odanil de Jesus Gonzalez, and Brent Munoz Mascara. Phone lines were open across the country with promises of total confidentiality. In Bogota, Medellin, and other cities, special numbers and drop locations were enabled to receive tips on his whereabouts. Ironically, the world's most wanted man, the same one who had ruled for the shadows with an iron fist and repeatedly evaded authorities, was once again on the run. But this time, his escape wasn't just an act of survival. It marked the beginning of an even bloodier phase in Colombian drug trafficking history. The escape from La Catedral triggered a new war, a relentless confrontation between Escobar and the government. In the days following his escape, the kingpin, with his persistent cunning and network of loyalists, began regaining ground. He used his skills to move in secrecy and the backing of his inner circle to stay ahead of his pursuers. However, the landscape had changed. In addition to the constant threat from the Colombian state, a greater danger loomed: Escobar's former allies. For years, he had been the central figure for the Medellin cartel. But times had changed. Those once aligned with his vision and fortune were beginning to distance themselves. The fierce competition for control of drug trafficking, especially with the Cali cartel, was intensifying. Escobar was no longer just an adversary of the Colombian government. He had also become a threat to other major players in the drug world. Alliances once thought unbreakable began to crumble. Leaders of the Cali cartel, seeing an opportunity to take full control of the cocaine trade, started planning how to eliminate Escobar, fearing that his return to power would pose a direct threat to their dominance. His escape also sparked internal conflict among criminal organizations, especially with the Cali cartel, which began taking concrete actions to confront him. In the days following his breakout, the Medellin drug lord faced not only state pressure, but also the pursuit of his former allies, who now saw his downfall as a top priority. They knew that if Escobar managed to reclaim power, their time at the top would be over. Amid this atmosphere of betrayal and fractured alliances, the Colombian state, no longer able to tolerate his presence, took decisive action. Thus, the Search Block was born, a special task force composed of members of the National Police, the Army, and international agencies like the DEA. Their mission was clear: to locate and dismantle Escobar's domain, ending his reign of terror. This elite group launched a tireless manhunt across the country, trying to find any trace of the most feared drug lord in recent memory. Yet Escobar, renowned for his cunning and ability to evade authorities, continued to slip through their grasp, aided by his vast network and deep knowledge of the terrain. The task force remained one step behind, frustrated by every unexpected move he made. During this period, Escobar's actions became increasingly risky and his behavior more aggressive. The killings and attacks, already part of his usual methods, grew in both frequency and brutality. As he felt the noose tighten, he used every ounce of power and influence to sow fear throughout the country, try and destabilize the government and prove he could still bend the state to his will. Violence erupted nationwide. Bombings, targeted assassinations, and attacks on vital infrastructure. Escobar intended to force the government to negotiate, turning the country into a war zone to do so. A group known as Los Extraditables claimed responsibility for attacks like the one on the secret police building in Bogota, which left over 35 dead, hundreds injured, and massive material damage. In his twisted logic, each act of destruction was proof of his continued ability to shape events, even in his increasingly vulnerable state. Escobar's escape became a national crisis and one of the most intense operations in the history of organized crime. The man who had always moved with strategy and determination now consolidated his defense, surrounded by loyalists and using violence as his primary weapon. International manhunts, internal betrayals, and acts of barbarity became daily occurrences in a Colombia that could no longer look away from the horror. Escobar, once the undisputed king of drug trafficking, had unleashed an unprecedented war, a conflict no longer limited to the criminal underworld, but one that affected the entire nation, trapping innocent citizens in the midst of chaos. The confrontation between Pablo Escobar and the Colombian government was no longer confined to shadows. It had reached the streets and the daily lives of millions. As pressure intensified, Escobar became more ruthless, resorting to increasingly brutal methods. Violence escalated to the point of becoming an unparalleled urban war. His tactic was clear: to sow absolute terror. Bombs, attacks, and indiscriminate killings became the norm, regardless of who the victim was. The only thing that mattered was imposing his will through fear. In a nation already battered by violence, Escobar's attacks broke all limits. It was no longer just about eliminating enemies. It was about turning all of Colombian society into a target of his fury. No one was safe, rich or poor, military personnel, police officers, or ordinary citizens. Anyone could become a victim of his personal war. In major cities like Bogota, Medellin, and Barrancabermeja, horror became part of everyday life. Violence had become routine. Cars packed with explosives frequently detonated, leaving behind scenes of death and devastation. It wasn't unusual for multiple blasts to occur in a single day, each more destructive than the last. The echo of those explosions remained etched in the minds of citizens, who lived in constant fear that the next attack might strike them or their loved ones. Both the public and the authorities struggled to make sense of the relentless chain of assaults. While people tried to maintain an appearance of normal life, Escobar, obsessed with having absolute control of the surroundings, plunged the country into a state of terror that erased any notion of normality. What began as a struggle to maintain influence in the cocaine trade became an almost apocalyptic scenario, where the line between life and death was barely perceptible. Escobar, like a vengeful deity, made no distinctions. He didn't differentiate between those who opposed him directly and those who were simply collateral victims of his rampage. His campaign of terror wasn't limited to officials, judges, or police. It directly affected the civilian population, which was caught in the crossfire between the state and the cartels. The death toll was staggering. In Medellin, one of the drug lord's main strongholds, a single attack killed 19 people. In Bogota, the capital, the toll was even worse. 39 lives lost. But behind those numbers were real tragedies. Broken families, communities scarred by pain and hopelessness. In Barrancabermeja, another attack claimed 16 more lives. These incidents ceased to be isolated events and became part of a grim routine. It was a constant nightmare. Colombians lived in fear of becoming just another statistic in Escobar's macabre death count. The most terrifying aspect of this wave of terror was that the drug lord no longer recognized any limits. To him, the entire Colombian state apparatus was an enemy to eliminate. In his mind, there was no room for truces or agreements. Driven by his oversized ego and hunger for domination, he sought to make it clear that no one, not the government, not the justice system, not the citizenry, was beyond his reach. The war was no longer just for control of the drug trade. It had become a battle for the mental domination of the entire country. He wanted to maintain the image of being someone capable of plunging an entire nation into chaos with a single command. However, the situation began to shift as pressure on Escobar increased. Even as panic continued to spread through the streets, new enemies emerged from within the world of drug trafficking itself. A group known as Los Peeps, made up of former collaborators who had turned against him, began a systematic hunt for Escobar's trusted men. Betrayal became a constant. Former allies, tired of the boundless violence and the absolute power he exercised, decided to act. Los Peeps began dismantling the Medellin cartel's networks, relentlessly pursuing those still loyal to their former leader. Escobar, now surrounded by enemies on all fronts, began to see his empire crumbling from within. This dramatic turn of events not only exposed a weakening of Escobar's dominance, but also revealed the cost of an excessive obsession with power. The man who once built a reign of terror was now facing not just the Colombian state, but also those who had once walked by his side. And as the attacks continued and betrayals multiplied, Escobar slowly became isolated, while Colombia endured one of the darkest periods in its history, a time when violence became a tool of power and death was a constant companion of all who lived under the shadow of fear. December 2nd, 1993, became a pivotal date that marked the end of a cycle, though the echoes of that day still resound in the darkest corners of history. It was a moment when Pablo Escobar, the man who had plunged the country into a sea of blood and destruction, was finally cornered, with the threads of his existence about to unravel. After more than 12 months of intense pursuit, a combined operation by Colombian security forces managed to track him down, all thanks to a series of phone calls Escobar had made to his son, a seemingly irrelevant clue that ended up being the key to locating him. However, true to his nature, Escobar, like his empire, did not go down without resistance. On that crucial day, as the noose tightened and his name had become synonymous with terror, the drug lord attempted to escape across the rooftops of nearby houses. But death was already waiting for him. From above, well-trained security forces, determined to end his reign of terror, acted without hesitation. His desperate escape attempt was thwarted, and the man who had built a criminal monster met his end, suspended between the bricks of his own legend. The official version, proudly presented by authorities, claimed that Escobar was killed in a shootout with law enforcement. But, as often happens in darker tales, alternative accounts soon emerged. Los Peeps, the former allies turned hunters, claimed responsibility for locating and subsequently executing him. According to their version, Escobar did not die fighting but was deliberately hunted down as part of a deadly strategy and eliminated coldly in retaliation for years of brutality. Yet the most disturbing theories come from those who believe that Escobar, realizing there was no escape, decided to take his own life. His son has stated that his father even taught him how to commit suicide, warning him never to shoot himself in the mouth, forehead, or temple, as those shots might deflect and fail. According to him, the only guaranteed point was the right ear, precisely where the fatal bullet entered Escobar's head. That day, Escobar broke his usual pattern. He used the phone multiple times, something he hadn't done in 10 years. Those calls, his son claims, were not accidental but intentional. He wanted to be found. Could it be that the man who never showed fear toward the state, or even death, had finally succumbed to the weight of his own despair? In a country full of myths and legends, many believe Escobar was not captured, but, seeing his empire collapse like a house of cards, chose to take control of his own fate. Some rumors even claim the body was found in a position suggesting a voluntary act, a suicide carried out before authorities could lay hands on him. There are many versions, and none have definitively clarified what happened in those final minutes. The only certainty is that on December 2nd, 1993, a colossal figure disappeared, and in his place, a myth was born that still lives on today. The figure of Pablo Escobar, known as El Patron, remains etched in the collective memory of Colombians and in popular imagination. Though his body is gone, his influence persists as a shadow still looming over the country's history. The scars he left are deep, and it often feels as if he never truly left. Escobar's legacy is as contradictory and fascinating as his life was. In Medellin, his hometown, and in various corners of the world, his name continues to spark debate and reflection. For some, he was a people's hero, someone who, despite his crimes, helped the needy by building neighborhoods, sports fields, and providing jobs for thousands. For others, he was a monster who plunged Colombia into a spiral of chaos, bloodshed, and despair, leaving countless innocent victims in his wake. What is certain is that Escobar, the man who built an empire on violence, fear, and power, remains an enigmatic and captivating figure. His life was full of contradictions. What only adds to the mystery surrounding him is that he was undoubtedly a ruthless criminal who turned the country into the global hub of drug trafficking. But he was also someone who knew how to use the system to his advantage, even posing as the savior of the marginalized. Thus, Pablo Escobar remains a figure that defies any easy classification. He doesn't quite fit the label of hero, nor can he be confined solely to that of a villain. Today, his image remains alive in popular culture, not only in Colombia but around the world. Documentaries, series, and books continue to explore his story, revealing hidden aspects of his reign and feeding the legend that, for better or worse, never truly died. Escobar, the man who dared to challenge the law, confront governments, and even mock death, continues to be an unsolved enigma, a figure that has surpassed the limits of reality and become part of contemporary mythology. Though he is no longer physically present, his influence lingers like a dormant enigma, a legacy that evokes not only blood and domination, but also the deep contradictions of someone who, until the end, operated from the shadows. And so, despite his demise, the myth surrounding Escobar remains intact, echoing in the darkest corners of collective memory. He leaves us with a lingering question. Who was Pablo Escobar really? A man who, like his own empire, collapsed under the weight of the forces he helped build? Or a legend forged amid death and chaos? One that even today continues to fuel the mystery of a story that seems to have no end